You know that moment when you open your banking app, fully prepared to feel proud of yourself, and then you see the number and think, wait, that's it? After all that effort? It's that tiny sting in your stomach, like you got caught doing something wrong, even though you're doing everything right. You're saving, you're trying, you're making sacrifices, but the number on the screen refuses to move the way you want it to. Maybe it even goes down sometimes, which is somehow even more insulting. And if you're like most people, there's this quiet frustration building in the background, this feeling of, why does everyone else seem to be moving ahead while I feel like I'm running in place? Here's the part nobody says out loud. You're not imagining it. The early stages of saving money actually do feel terrible. They're slow, they're boring, and a lot of the time they're downright discouraging. But here's the kicker. The reason they feel this way is not because you're doing something wrong. It's because almost nobody tells you about the tiny threshold where everything changes. Every financial guru on the internet will throw out numbers like, you need $50,000 invested, or you don't feel the effects until you're at 6 figures. But the truth is way less intimidating. The number where things finally start to shift, really shift, is much, much smaller. It's the $7,000 mark. A number so small the industry never talks about it, but so powerful that once you cross it, your financial life starts to feel different. Not because you suddenly get rich, but because your money finally starts working with you instead of you dragging it like dead weight. My name is Max, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and economic data, so you don't have to. If you want to understand the real mechanics of wealth, the part nobody explains but everyone wishes they knew, go ahead and like the video and hit subscribe. I promise what you're about to hear will change the way you think about saving forever. All right, let's break this open. Most people believe money works like this. You save a little, the amount grows a little, and eventually the magic of compounding kicks in and everything starts accelerating. But that's not actually how it feels in the real world, not even close. And the reason is simple. Compound interest doesn't feel like anything when you're starting them out as microscopic. Think of it like pushing a giant boulder on flat ground. You can push and push and push, and for the first few feet, it feels like it's barely moving. It's exhausting. You question your life choices. You wonder if this is even worth it. But then, once you've moved it far enough, the momentum starts to shift. The resistance drops. You feel the weight cooperating with you. It's subtle at first, then unmistakable. That's exactly what happens at around $7,000 in savings or investments. Before that number, every dollar feels like it's coming from your sweat, your discipline, your sacrifice. After that number, you start experiencing something new. Money being created in the background, quietly, consistently, automatically. Now, let me be very clear. $7,000 is not a magic number from the universe. It's not some spiritual milestone. It's a behavioral threshold. It's the point where the human brain, which is absolute garbage at understanding exponential growth, suddenly gets a taste of what compounding actually feels like. And once you feel it, everything changes. But before we get into the psychology, let's start with the math, because numbers tell the story better than anything. Imagine someone who has $0 saved. They commit to putting away $200 a month. That's not easy. That's skipping dinners out, avoiding little luxuries, and fighting the constant temptation to buy something that gives you a quick dopamine hit. After 12 months of sacrifice, they look at their account and see $2,400. That's it. $2,400, which, by the way, in today's world where everything from rent to groceries costs more than it used to, doesn't feel like life-changing money, and it isn't. So the brain says, why am I doing all this for something that still feels so tiny? Now, let's extend this. After 24 months, that person finally reaches around $5,000. Again, a big accomplishment logically, but emotionally, still frustrating. Because the distance between 0 and 5,000 feels enormous. And again, almost none of that increase came from growth. It came from discipline and sacrifice. You did the work. Your money didn't help much. But watch what happens next. Somewhere between the 2.5 and 3-year mark, they pass the $7,000. And this is the moment most people don't understand. Something new starts to appear. Small, almost invisible at first, but it's there. Your money starts making you money. Let's run the numbers. With a normal return, nothing crazy, nothing speculative, just a boring, steady 7% return like broad index funds have averaged. $7,000 earns you around $490 a year. And sure, that's not going to buy you a Tesla. But here's where it gets interesting. $490 a year is about $40 a month, which means without doing anything, you've effectively increased your monthly contributions by 20%. It's like having a silent partner who finally showed up to help carry the weight. And this is where your brain has its first breakthrough. Wait, my money is actually doing something. You feel it, and that feeling is powerful. People underestimate how emotional money is. They assume it's math, spreadsheets, discipline, logic. But behavioral economists and psychologists who study this stuff have been screaming for years. Humans don't make financial decisions based on numbers. They make them based on feelings. And the early stages of saving feel like failure. They feel slow. They feel pointless. But once you cross that $7,000 line, something flips. It's like switching from pushing that giant boulder on flat ground to pushing it downhill. The physics change, but more importantly, your belief changes. Now let's compare two scenarios. Scenario A, you're stuck below that threshold. Every month, you grind out your contribution. You're saving $200, $200, $200. And every month, your brain is looking at the account saying, still small, still not enough, still me doing all the work. And that lack of emotional payoff is why most people quit. Studies from Vanguard show that the number one predictor of long-term wealth is not income, but behavior. And behavior is driven by emotion. It's not that people don't want to save, it's that they can't feel the progress early enough to stay motivated. Now, scenario B, you pass the $7,000 mark. Suddenly your account is growing by $40, $50, $60 a month without you touching it. And here's the wild part. Once you hit about $10,000, which happens surprisingly fast compared to the journey from 0 to 7,000, the growth starts hitting triple digits a year. Now you're at $700 in yearly growth. That's almost $60 a month. Then, as your contributions continue, you hit $12,000. Now your money is generating almost $840 a year. That's $70 a month. And before you know it, your money is contributing the same amount you used to contribute manually. That's the moment when people say, "Oh, this is real." But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We still need to talk about why 7,000 is the tipping point for most people. Because mathematically, compounding works at any number. Even $100 compounds. But psychologically, that doesn't matter. Nobody feels 37 cents of growth. Nobody gets excited that their account made $1.14 last week. The brain needs something noticeable to anchor to, something that feels like progress. And for most people, that number is around $40 to $60 a month in growth. That's when the emotional reward kicks in. That's when the brain goes, "Hey, this is working." And here's the part that really blows people's minds. The time it takes to grow your savings shrinks dramatically once you pass that threshold. The first $7,000 might take you 2 or 3 years, depending on your income and discipline. But the next $7,000, often less than half the time. Why? Because now you're not walking alone. Money is walking with you. And here's where the psychological shift really starts forming. Before the threshold, saving feels like survival mode. You're constantly worried, constantly pinching pennies, constantly feeling behind. But after the threshold, your brain shifts into something I call opportunity mode. Suddenly you're thinking long-term. You're looking at investments differently. You're interested in growth instead of just safety. You feel, maybe for the first time in your life, momentum. And momentum changes everything.
Here's where things really start to click. Momentum is not just a financial phenomenon, it's a psychological one. When you're below $7,000, you're in what I call the fragile stage. Every setback feels catastrophic. A car repair wipes out months of progress. A medical bill knocks you right back to where you started. And every time that happens, your brain reinforces the same message. See? Saving doesn't work. What's the point? But once you cross that early compounding threshold, the dynamic shifts. You develop something behavioral economists call financial resilience. It's this feeling of, okay, that sucked, but I'll bounce back. And you know why? Because now your money has enough mass to survive small hits. A $400 emergency doesn't send you into a spiral. It just slows you down. Your boulder keeps rolling downhill. And that alone reduces stress. You sleep better. You make decisions from a calm mind instead of a panicked one. You stop catastrophizing every little financial inconvenience. In other words, the world stops feeling like it's collapsing every time you open your banking app. Now, I want to slow down and walk you through something subtle but massively important. Before the $7,000 mark, most people feel like they're building savings. Every dollar feels like another brick, and brick by brick, it takes forever. After 7,000, people feel like they're protecting savings. The psychology flips. Instead of thinking, I need to build more, you start thinking, I don't want to lose this progress. And studies show that people protect existing gains much more aggressively than they pursue new ones. That shift right there is why so many people suddenly become consistent savers after years of inconsistency. They finally have something meaningful enough that their brain says this is worth defending. Now, let's go deeper into the math, because this is where the holy crap moment usually happens. I want you to imagine two people. Both make the same income, both save the same amount each month. But person A is at $0 and person B is at $7,000. They both put in $200 a month. After 1 year, person A has $2,400 in contributions, plus a few dollars in growth. Person B has $2,400 in contributions, plus almost $500 in growth. Same income, same discipline, same effort. But one has a tailwind and the other is fighting headwind after headwind. And the difference between those two states is not luck, not privilege, not intelligence. It's the threshold. This is why wealth feels easier once you have some. Not because the rich get richer, but because compounding finally becomes noticeable. It becomes something you can actually feel. It goes from theoretical to emotional. And humans don't respond to theory, they respond to emotion. Let's keep running this example. Year 2. Person A is finally at $5,000 or so. Person B is now at around $11,000 to $12,000. By year 3, person A passes $7,000. Good for them. They're finally hitting the threshold. But person B, they're crossing $15,000 or $16,000. And suddenly, their money is generating more growth per month than some people save. That's the snowball effect everyone talks about, but almost nobody explains in psychological terms. And here's the thing people really misunderstand. The reason the first threshold matters so much isn't about how much money it is. It's about the time it saves you. The first 7,000 might take 2, 3, or even 4 years depending on your situation. But the next 7,000, for most people, it takes 12 to 18 months. This 7,000 after that, maybe 8 to 10 months. And at some point, you start hitting levels where your money is doubling faster than you ever thought possible. Not because you're making more money, but simply because you cross the invisible line where compounding stops being microscopic and starts being meaningful. This is why financial educators like to talk about the first $100,000 being the hardest, but honestly, that number is way too big for most people to even visualize. The brain shuts down. $100,000 is intimidating. It feels like Everest. But $7,000? That feels human, reachable, like something you could actually get to with enough discipline and time. And once you're there, you start having the first real emotional payoff in your financial life. Now, let's get into something even more interesting. What happens to your decision-making after this point? Before the threshold, most people live in what behavioral psychologists call scarcity mode. Scarcity mode is brutal. It narrows your thinking. It reduces creativity. It makes you more impulsive. It makes you more risk-averse in the wrong ways and more risk-prone in the wrong ways. When you're in scarcity mode, you buy things for a moment of relief instead of long-term value. You take small financial risks that feel safe but are actually harmful. And you avoid larger financial risks that could help you simply because you don't have the mental bandwidth to think long-term.
But after the $7,000, your brain shifts into opportunity mode. You start thinking about your future self. You start looking at investments not as threats, but as tools. You start being more intentional with your purchases. You stop chasing tiny wins and start focusing on meaningful ones. This shift is so powerful that in some financial psychology studies, researchers found that people with even $5,000 to $7,000 in liquid savings were dramatically less stressed, dramatically more confident, and dramatically more strategic in their financial decisions than people with less than $1,000, even when their incomes were identical. Think about that for a second. Two people making the same amount of money, but one of them feels like they can breathe. That's not luck. That's not personality. That's a threshold effect. But I know what some people are thinking right now. Max, I barely make enough to save. How am I supposed to get to $7,000? And listen, I get it. I've been there. I know what living paycheck to paycheck feels like. And you're right. This is hard. It's not fun. It's not glamorous. And yes, it takes time. But here's the truth most people don't want to hear. The difficulty doesn't make the threshold less real, it just means you have to approach it differently. You don't need giant leaps. You need consistency. You need small, boring, unsexy habits that stack up over time. $10 here, $20 there, a little bit every paycheck. The goal isn't to become a superhero, the goal is to cross the line where the game starts getting easier. And remember, the $7,000 mark is not the end of the road. It's the beginning of the easier half of the journey. It's the moment the slope starts tilting in your favor. And once you're on that slope, you start seeing opportunities everywhere. You start seeing progress everywhere. You start feeling control instead of chaos. But we still haven't talked about the biggest secret of all, the psychological shift that happens inside you the moment your money starts making more money than your sacrifices. This shift is so powerful, so underrated, and so rarely discussed that it should honestly be taught in every school. And it's the reason why your financial life never feels the same again after this point.
Here's where everything comes together, the psychological shift. This is the moment people rarely talk about, but it's the reason this whole $7,000 rule matters. It's the moment when your identity changes. Before this point, you see yourself as someone who's trying to save. After this point, you start seeing yourself as someone who is good with money. And that identity shift is far more powerful than any budgeting trick or savings hack on the internet. Because once your identity shifts, your behavior follows automatically. You stop debating whether you should contribute to your investments this month. You stop doing mental gymnastics to justify impulse purchases. You stop saying things like, "I'll start saving once I make more money." You start thinking like a builder, like someone who has momentum, like someone who has future plans instead of financial fear. It's subtle, but it's a complete rewiring of how you relate to money. Let me give you a real example of how this plays out. Before the threshold, you might look at a $200 concert ticket and think, well, I deserve it. I need a break. And honestly, you probably do. But after the threshold, you start thinking, yeah, I want this, but I also want my money to keep growing. I want next year to be easier than this year. And that tiny shift in thinking accumulates. Over a year, it might be the difference between staying stuck at $2,000 and breaking past $9,000 or $10,000. People underestimate how much small decisions add up, but they also underestimate how much easier those decisions become once you feel the momentum. Another thing that changes is your sense of time. Before the $7,000, the future feels vague, distant, foggy. You can't visualize your future self because you're too busy dealing with financial fires in the present. But after the threshold, the future starts to feel real. You start imagining where you could be in a year, or 3, or 5. And once you start thinking in years instead of days, your financial behavior improves automatically. You don't need motivation, you don't need willpower, you just need momentum. And momentum takes care of the rest. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. The world is designed in a way that keeps most people from ever reaching this threshold. Not because they can't, but because everything around them fights against it. Ads fight against it. Social media fights against it. Lifestyle inflation fights against it. Even fear fights against it.
Because once you start saving, your brain starts whispering all these anxious thoughts like, what if I need this money? What if I'm doing this wrong? What if there's a better way? What if the market crashes? But once you cross that $7,000 line, those voices get quieter. Not because the fear disappears, but because confidence replaces it. And you know what confidence actually is? It's not bravado. It's not pretending you know what you're doing. Confidence is evidence. The evidence that your money is growing. The evidence that you can stick to a plan. The evidence that setbacks don't destroy you anymore. And once you have that evidence, you stop relying on hope and you start relying on momentum. But let's talk about objections, because I can hear them already. But Max, I don't make enough money to save consistently. Max, my expenses are too high. Max, you don't understand my situation. And listen, you're right. I don't know your exact situation. I don't know the details of your life. But I do know the data. And the data says something most people don't want to hear. It's not about the size of your contributions. It's about the consistency of them. $10 a week becomes $520 a year. $20 a week becomes over $1,000. $50 a week becomes $2,600. None of these amounts will make you rich overnight, but they will get you closer to the threshold. And once you cross it, the game changes. You don't need perfect budgeting. You don't need perfect discipline. You don't need a high income. You need time, consistency, and the willingness to make small, boring decisions that slowly stack up. This is not sexy. This is not glamorous. But the truth is, wealth is built by people who are willing to be bored. People who are willing to do the same small habits over and over again without immediate gratification. And almost nobody talks about this because it's not fun to sell, but it's the truth. Now, I want to give you a perspective shift that helped me when I was first building my savings. Instead of thinking, I'm only saving a little, I started thinking, every dollar I save is a worker I'm hiring for my future. That dollar goes out into the world, works for me, brings back a profit, and then recruits new workers. And at first, you only have a tiny team, a couple $100, maybe $1,000. They're doing their best. But once you hit $7,000, suddenly your team has enough people to make progress without you micromanaging them. They work 24/7. They don't sleep. They don't complain. They don't ask for raises. They just quietly build your future. And here's the wild part. After enough time, your money begins to make more money in a year than you can comfortably save. Think about that. Imagine your investments growing by $5,000 or $6,000 in a year. That's more than some people save with discipline and sacrifice. And once you reach that point, you realize something profound. Wealth is not built by grinding harder. It's built by getting your money to work harder. And that starts at the $7,000 threshold. But we're not done. There's one more psychological shift that happens once you cross this line. It's something I call financial detachment. Before the threshold, you're emotionally attached to every dollar. You obsess over every decision. You feel guilty every time you spend something. You hesitate, you worry, you stress. But after the threshold, you start detaching, not in a careless way, but in a healthy way. You stop obsessing, you stop panicking. You stop thinking every purchase is a setback, because now you know, deep down, that your money is working behind the scenes. This detachment is what allows you to finally enjoy your life while still building your future. You stop choosing between now and later. You realize that you can have both, as long as you respect the threshold and maintain your momentum. And once you taste that feeling, you never want to go back. It's addictive in the best possible way. Now, let's zoom out. If you walk away from this video with one idea, let it be this. Your financial life doesn't change when you hit six figures. It doesn't change when you max out retirement accounts. It doesn't change when you make more money. It changes the moment your savings start working harder than you do. And for most people, that moment begins at $7,000. That's the point where the math becomes psychological, where effort becomes momentum, where sacrifice becomes progress, and where your identity starts to shift from "I hope things get better" to "I know things get better." So if you're below the threshold right now, don't beat yourself up. Don't feel behind. Don't feel like it's impossible. You're not doing anything wrong. You're just early in the journey. The hardest, slowest, most discouraging part of the journey. The part nobody warns you about. And if you're already past the threshold, even a little, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. You can feel the shift. You know the momentum is real. But either way, I want you to remember this. Your future self is counting on you. 30-year-old you, 40-year-old you, 60-year-old you. They're all waiting for the decisions you're making right now. And saving is not about deprivation. It's about building a version of you that doesn't have to live in fear. A version of you that gets to make choices. A version of you that is free. So keep going. Keep stacking. Keep pushing that boulder until gravity takes over. Because once your money starts working for you, everything changes. My name is Max, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and economic data, so you don't have to. If you want to understand the real mechanics of wealth, the part nobody explains but everyone wishes they knew, go ahead and like the video and hit subscribe. And remember, the first 7,000 feels impossible, but everything after it feels inevitable.